You're listening to the Patriot Nation Podcast.
All right, welcome into another edition of the Patriot Nation Podcast. As always, you got Pat Lane here with my man, Matt St. Jean. And tonight we have a very, very, very special guest, the creator of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, a Football Guys senior staff writer. It is none other than Matt Waldman. Matt, thank you so much for joining the show. We're very excited to have you on.
Hey, I'm just as excited to join you guys, Matt. It's going to be a good time. Mark Schofield is a good friend of mine. We were talking about that a little bit behind the scenes off there, and it's nice to be able to talk about a storied organization. That's for sure.
Yes, yeah. And as Connor says, you're here to solve the Pats wide receiver problem. So that's good. We can all they can do is listen to our show, and they'll be good to go.
I used to like to joke. I've joked on some of my shows that if there was an organization that I would love to have low-hanging fruit to be on as a consultant, it would be to talk wide receivers and to scout wide receivers for the New England Patriots. But I don't think it's because it's the scouts. I actually think it's more the coaching staffs in the past and the front office, but we can get into that.
Yeah. So I think maybe we should even start there. We're obviously going to talk about the 2025 draft, right? But I would like to start with some of the mistakes that the Patriots have made in the past and some of the things that, that have been right there. And we've gone ad nauseum about some of the things, right? And I think that the mistakes that they made along the offensive line in the last 5 years were disastrous and kind of set them up to where they are today. But I think more specifically, because we're talking about pass catchers, what they've done at the tight end position and at the wide receiver position have put them in this situation. And I think if you could, specifically, where do you think the biggest misstep was for them? I don't know, maybe we look at big picture, but I'm curious about, where you think kind of that biggest misstep for them was.
Sure. I mean, I think that big picture, you look, Bill Belichick, obviously we know one of the greatest coaches in history. And certainly the regime that they had did fantastic work as a group. And so a lot's to be said there in terms of praise, but at the same time, very few coaches can be everything. And even Belichick himself said, we're really good at drafting slot receivers. Yeah, but that's about it. And you can look at the history of guys, from Dotson and Harry and on the line, and you can say, yeah, that's probably pretty true that they have a good eye for slot talent, but the rest isn't there. And I used to wonder what that was really about. But then when you take a look at, I watched a show a few years ago where Dante Scarnecchia was on the air on the Ringer, as a guest with Rick Spielman, who was also the other guest on that show, on that Ringer podcast. And they were talking about the draft, and they asked Scarnecchia about what's the process for how you guys evaluate talent and what's your involvement with that. And I think that this show, by most people who were fans and media, saw this as like an inside football view in the window of the Patriots organization and what's made them great. But as a former operations manager and a process manager and someone who looked at best practices with processes, especially when it comes to evaluating performance, what I saw were lots of opportunities for improvement. And part of that is that Scarnecchia said, look, well, after we had the playoffs or the Super Bowl, Bill would send us a hit list of players that the scouts had looked at that we want to take a closer look at. And so it would be, late winter, early spring that you'd have the coaches looking at this, and then they would give their notes, and then they would share their notes with Bill, and then they would adjust their boards accordingly. That's what I took from what I remember hearing. And I may not be 100% accurate because it's been a few years since I've listened to this, but that's pretty much what it was. Well, here's the problem with that. The people who evaluate your talent every year are the scouts. They're the ones that you need to probably be on the same page with. So your scouts, if if you're changing your mind about how you want things done, or you're coming out over the top of the scouts and the scouts aren't knowing what you're looking for as a coaching staff, you've wasted time because they're doing this all year long. And then there's no real groupthink about, to get into consensus about what is valued. What type of fits do we want with an organization? What type of player are we looking for? What are the scouts missing that we have to come over the top and share with you what's going on? That can be easily teachable. What are things that maybe scouts could say in response and say, well, here's what we valued in hindsight. Here's what you picked. You've picked a bunch of slot receivers. We value these guys who've gone on to do things as outside receivers that you guys could have had. We don't know what those conversations were, but they're missing. So, part of that, I know that part of that was meant to say, hey, here's what we're doing. But they revealed more of the issues and the gaps that were involved, because if you're making these adjustments in February and March, you're at the 11th hour. These are things that you could have said, hey, this is what we need to do moving forward. And then you don't have to have this type of late stage of the game adjustment every year. And you might actually get more people involved who can do better legwork for you. So I think that was probably one of the biggest opportunities here, is that when you look at the players, and from what I've seen, I don't know whether it's the scouts, and I have heard from some people who are connected to organizations, that from an executive level, being a scout for the New England Patriots is a good resume builder. That's what I've heard. Mm-hmm. From a scout level, and this is only from a small sample of scouts, I'm not that connected to the league, but I do have people who I've talked to. They have said historically that being a scout for the Patriots is a good resume builder, yes, but you don't want to stay there too long. And that kind of closes the circle with that podcast, because if what I took from the podcast to be true, then the scouts would feel valued to be doing the work they want to do and want to continue to grow within an organization. But if they know that they're just having people come over the top and not even be inclusive on how do you help build the team, then you probably go, well, having the Patriots on my resume is nice early on, but I don't want to stay here too long because maybe I'm not really getting the growth opportunities that I could have to become a better personnel evaluator, better in what I want to do long term. So again, that's just my take on from what I see with it. So when you look at receivers, the gaps that I see with the receivers that I've seen are that you get great slot receivers, but your outside receivers tend to have either you're not getting guys who are true fits on the outside. Like Kayshon Boutte had his issues off the field. But when you watch him as an evaluated player, I saw him as like a Jarvis Landry type of player, someone who's a little faster than you think, but not fast enough to really be that outside guy.
Weren't their measurables very similar too?
Yes. Yeah. He's like a cross between Robert Woods and Jarvis Landry, if you ask me. Very sure-handed, with the exception of certain types of plays where he has to really extend outward from his frame, and then he clap attacks and fights the football. But good route runner, good runner after the catch, very good in the middle of the field. And you can see that he improved, after really being buried 2 years ago. And then last year, when they needed him, he was at least showing up and producing, and even on the outside and beating people on the outside one-on-one in some cases. So you can see what's there for him, but at the same time, he's not a true X. You'd probably rather have him play slot flanker. And then you look at Polk, and Polk, while he was known for catching the ball, was dropping a lot this past year. But a lot of that has to do with your bandwidth being overextended when you're a rookie, when you have to do too much, and as a route runner, his ability to release against press coverage had a lot of up and down types of flaws, things that you saw on tape where it's when the light switch came on, he could do certain things well, but when he wasn't playing with focus and intensity, he would have lapses where he wouldn't perform those tasks the way that you could see on other parts of film where he did. So, and then again, he's a guy that, did he have a role? Was he really an X? Is he really a flanker? Is he really a slot player? And then when they pick the guys who have flanker like X speed, they can't catch, or they can't fully run routes to a level that you would like. Or if they pick the flanker, he can catch, but he doesn't quite have the separation ability or the skill to run crisp routes. And now you're looking at like someone that I would joke is like the Kenny Galladay, Chase Claypool type, which is, if you sandwich him between two excellent top end outside wide receivers, and he can draw linebackers and safeties and run sail routes, and seam routes all day long, he might give you 800 to 1,000 yards and a great offense. But then if you ask him to be the man and be the focus of the opposing defense, they pretty much take him away because he can't do anything more than bully mismatches. And so the Patriots you can see that whether I would be willing to bet more that it's less the scouts and more the coaches of the past who kind of had it in their mind that they're going to run things and they're going to keep their hands tight to this stuff. And they're kind of stiff arming the scouts out there from really having that kind of input. And a lot of scouts in the league get asked to be kind of data collectors rather than evaluator these days. Right. And so that's prone to happen. And as a result, you get this kind of, we're throwing darts at wide receivers more than we're having a process to make sure that we're avoiding guys who can't run routes well, avoiding guys who have trouble fighting the ball, and avoiding guys who we don't really know what role they have because of their athletic ability. It isn't clearly, one role to the next.
Well, you mentioned too who you're letting make the decisions with the scouts. Go back to the N'Keal Harry pick. A lot's been made about that. And I believe, what's been said is that Belichick was the final guy on that, and that the deciding factor was, I think, the top 30 visit, the workout when he came to Foxborough, that and a conversation with Jim Mora. Is that Jim Mora? No.
I don't think it was Jim
Edwards
Jr. Herm Edwards. That's right.
Yeah. About Harry, and that was kind of the tiebreaker between he and AJ Brown, which just does, like, if you have otherworldly intuition about how to handle those things, that can be a good process, I guess, but you're just never going to be able to do that consistently over a long run. Like, college coaches will lie to you. They want their guys to get drafted so they can go back to recruits and say, look how high this guy got drafted. You can't trust what they're going to say 100% of the time. And the same thing happened with Cole Strange. That was, it's been reported a lot that was kind of, I think, a breaking point for ownership to step in and say, hey, we need a more transparent, actual process for how to handle this.
And by the way, outside of the pass catcher, the same exact thing happened with Dominique Easley, right? Dominique Easley was the same thing where, Belichick fell in love with the guy that he could be. And, the scouts were terrified of it, but he drafted him anyways. And, and we see how that worked out. And so, it's the Harry one is interesting because, you pointed out, Matt, but it's just like, if you wanted a guy that was a contested catch guy, AJ Brown was significantly better and faster. If you wanted a big body guy, DK Metcalf was significantly better. And so it was like, what did you want?
If you want the guy to break tackles, there's Deebo Samuel.
Right. It made no sense. He kind of did everything, but he was like third best at everything. And it was just like, why are you drafting this guy?
Yeah. Matt, and there's a funny thing on that. That was like the first year I got into the draft, and I watched Harry, and I was like, because I was just like, all I did was watch receivers the Pats could take at that point in the draft. And I was like, there's only one guy I don't want them to take, and it's N'Keal Harry. I was like in my amateur view, it was, this guy's like a third round pick to me. And it was one of those where like the athletic testing very clearly does not match the player you're seeing on the field. Like I just did not think that was the same guy. And it was, okay, this is a guy who benefited from broken tackles and some poor Pac-12 defenders. And like, there's a path for him to be successful. Like if things work out, if he gets more flexible in the NFL and learns some of the route running stuff, you could see how he could be successful. But this is not like first round odds of this working out. And there's a video my roommate took of me in college, just like having a meltdown when that pick went in. So
Well, the good thing for you guys is that the coach who was involved in the selection of A.J. Brown is now your head coach. And because you could say that I would bet the Arkansas kid that didn't work out. I didn't have a huge grade on him. I had Ben Solak and I on to talk about him pre-draft, and I think Ben was a big fan, but I wasn't.
He reminded me of N'Keal Harry, the same body type, big, fast, strong, can't move laterally.
But I don't think that was. I'm pretty sure that was when the Titans got a new GM, Rand Carthon. I want to say maybe that was the first year with Rand Carthon, and they went that direction. I think the only guy that maybe was firmly a Vrabel regime draft pick at wide receiver was A.J. Brown. And so maybe that will be a good thing. I don't know if it will be, but I'm hoping it will be.
Pat, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I thought I was. Yeah. I muted myself for a second, and then I couldn't unmute. The Traylon Burks thing is interesting because that was the A.J. Brown pick. They had made the A.J. Brown trade on draft day and then took Traylon Burks right afterwards, and it was just like, what? Why are we talking? What are we doing here? And so, that was rough. I do hope that I do think that Vrabel is going to have final say. And so, look, I mean, we'll ultimately see what happens. I hope that he does use the scouts a little bit more, and they, kind of go off. And I understand that there's not necessarily a consensus in the room either, right? Like other guys may want, if you're sitting at number 4, there's probably different players, probably different people pulling for different players, right, in the room. Yeah. And someone's going to make that final decision. I get that, but you also have to be able to take everything in and come to a final consensus. And so, hopefully they get it right this year because they got it. I mean, Belichick got it right for a long time. For a long time, Belichick got it right. And you felt like if it was a first-round pick from Belichick, it was almost a guaranteed hit, right? I remember in 2001, everyone was screaming for David Terrell. And, they were at number 6, needed a wide receiver. And he said, no, I'm taking Richard Seymour. And, that one turned out to be pretty good. David Terrell ended up on the Patriots for a few years later after he got cut. And so, it ended up really interesting that at the last 5, 6, 7 years, Belichick just swing and a miss on a lot of people. And so that was kind of unfortunate. And whether that was on him or whether that was the scouting department or who knows what that exactly was. But we're hoping to turn this around because last year, Drake May, obviously big hit. Outside of that, not much going on outside of Drake May last year. So, they really need a strong draft this year.
Before we get into the receivers in this year's class, I am curious, Matt, of what you thought about Polk and Baker last year. First of all, when they got picked, if you thought that matched, and then, if you're the Patriots looking to get the best out of them in 2025, and, because I don't think there's a guarantee that either of these guys are on the roster, assuming that they're probably drafting at least one receiver in this class. There's going to be a pretty intense camp battle, I have to think. What do you think? I don't know. If you were the coach, how would you handle that going forward?
Well, I mean, I think that it's nice for them to at least publicly say that these guys have a clean slate. And from a grade standpoint, I had Javon Baker a little bit higher than Polk, but at the same time, that's because I don't look at off-field. So off-field isn't my thing. I don't have a team of investigators to be able to go and interview, a variety of people that I would need to have interviewed. And I know that the type of off-field scouting that's done by the NFL has as much variance in competency as there is variance in how teams value wide receivers based on the fact that some teams need a slot, some teams need a flanker, some teams need a hybrid, some teams need a split end. You just don't, so, a guy one guy might be a second round pick by one team, but because they don't need that role, might be a 5th round pick by another. And that's a truism there. But when you look at, off-field stuff, I mean, for me, some teams charge their scouts to not only collect the information and ask the questions, but they don't give them the training to really understand anything from an industrial psychology standpoint or a law enforcement background on how to parse information, but then ask them to make the judgment. So a good example of that would be the Baltimore Ravens when they picked up Jimmy Smith, the cornerback. Jimmy Smith, the Chicago Bears had him off their draft board completely because he smoked pot. And so at that time, they decided he smoked pot. He's a bad guy. He's all sorts of trouble. We don't want him. The Ravens found out, actually, when they asked the questions that they needed to ask, he's a good guy who does a lot in his community, who made the conscious choice that this is a better way to medicate my body after I get hurt than probably anything else. And I got caught doing it. And, you're not going to hear that publicly because, again, at that time especially, that's the optics don't look good for that. But as a team, and you know how the NFL is, and you know that they make drug tests very obvious, you've got to really be pretty dim and not understand what's going on to fail an NFL drug test. Right. And they know whether they're going to say it or not, that they give them a lot of room so that they can medicate themselves how they choose to be able to cope with pain and play. That's the unofficial rule of it, and that's the way it looks. So they knew that, and they picked Jimmy Smith, and Jimmy Smith was a good pick for them. But that's because a lot of teams have law enforcement and have psychologists on staff, and they're the ones that parse the information. They just teach these guys how to collect the data. So again, you look at Baker. I didn't know until after the draft that his dad apparently was highly involved in things in terms of in his son's life on a level that might be an annoyance to an organization. And I didn't know about certain isms maybe that Baker had with maturity that were talked about, with his game. But if you just look at him straight on the field, to me, he's a guy that could eventually be a Jeremy Maclin type of player, play, slot and flanker. He can win contested targets. He has some really good skills as a route runner, and some opportunities to even get better after the catch. So I think abandoning him would be kind of foolish unless there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. Right. And that there's very likely that could be the case. And then when you look at Polk, I had Polk a little bit lower, but I still had a grade on him where I felt like that he could contribute. The thing with him that I kind of had issues with is that while he caught the ball well in college, and you didn't really see any technique lapses, there were so many issues with releasing from the line of scrimmage. He just seemed to be where, how would I best put this? Like you would look at him and there would be things that you would ask him to do, but he didn't have the artistry. Like he had the tools, like he had the footwork, the hand counters. He had a lot of those things, but putting them together and using patient but sudden pacing to really bait a defender. Good receiver play is having artistry with how you sell your setups, how you sell your releases, and you always want to do it with a little bit of a slow, fast type of baiting with that type of work. And Polk just didn't do that. It was very mechanical. So when you talk about his skill set, when you're being mechanical, now you've got to focus on learning to be nuanced. And now you have a deeper playbook to look at, and then you have competition and more and savvier defenders. You start, when you get on the field and you're thinking about all that stuff, even the things that you had down pat are now falling apart because it's overwhelming. And I think that's what Polk went through. So I think both those guys still have a chance to be good if the team hasn't given up on them. And if Vrabel doesn't come in and say, well, that was the last regime, we're going to get our guys. And we're not going to, and unless they just blow the doors off of us in terms of impressing us, they're as good as gone. And you just don't know until we see how that unfolds.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, listen, you can't just replace everyone, and you get young guys on the roster that I think can theoretically make a difference. Now, listen, you brought in Stephon Diggs, which I'm happy about, but again, is he going to be ready to start the season, and what level is he going to be at all year long? And then,
what position is he going to play now?
Well, right. And that's right. So then that's the question. I feel like the best player that you have is Pop Douglas, but he's slot only. right? And so, all right, you got Kayshon Boutte, but can he really play the X? You got, you got Kendrick Bourne, you got Javon Baker, you got Jalen Polk, you got all these guys, but like none of those guys is a true outside X receiver, right? And so it's like you have all these different players, but it's like, yeah, okay, they're all okay, but
it's a slot receiver convention.
Well,
that's why I think this is why they signed Mac Hollins, because especially in the Josh McDaniels offense, he's not afraid to have the they call this the sacrificial X receiver. We're just gonna put a big guy or a fast guy outside. He's gonna be the number 3 in all the progressions. Like he's never gonna be the primary, and we're just gonna ask him to run fast down the field. And like that's his role. And there's a world where it's gonna be Diggs might be your flanker or slot, depending on what level he's at. And then Mac Hollins might just end up being the X because they want that skill set out there, depending on how the draft goes.
Yeah.
And then there's only one more spot on the field if you're playing 11 personnel, and they played a lot of 12 personnel last year, and they did well with it. So if there's only one other spot, who does that go to? There's only so many reps to go around to develop these guys. And for me, like Polk was a guy I really liked last year because I saw the flashes and I thought, there's something like, to me, I thought the best case for him is if this all comes together, he can actually be an X to the NFL. Maybe not a great one, but he can play that role for you and win with some quickness. And I think it's notable. First of all, the offensive coordinator from that Washington offense lasted 1 year in the NFL before getting canned.
Yeah.
And Patriots wide receiver coach last year was an assistant on that Washington team. And he has since lost his job, and the scuttlebutt at the combine apparently was that he was like the worst wide receiver coach in the NFL last year. And there was a lot about how that Washington offense was not very technique heavy for the receivers. It was a lot of freelancing from the receivers and just kind of going off of vibes and Penix finding people. And
think how good Penix actually is.
But right.
Yeah,
that's the case. Yeah. It's a strange. It's a weird situation. And I don't really know. I guess I don't really know what the answer was. I will tell you, as a guy who goes to training camp and attends training camps, and I live so close to stadium, so I try to go to everything. Early in the offseason, Jalen Polk looked like the best receiver on the Patriots. Like he looked like he really knew what he was doing. He was getting open consistently. He was catching the ball very well. And then at some point, he just stopped being good. And I don't know what it was. I don't know if the pads went on. I don't know if they tried to give him more. And Elliot Wolf talked about, we put a lot on his plate. Now, whether they saw what he was doing early on and said, oh, this kid can handle more and threw more on his plate, I don't know. But he went from a guy that could play to a guy that just couldn't.
I think the way you laid it out is perfect, especially how you laid it out, Pat, and how Matt set it up in terms of what was going on with the coaches and what was heard at the combine. Because typically in camp, what you see, and I'll use the Green Bay Packers as a similar example from a couple of years ago, or a few years ago when Aaron Rodgers was still there, and they had Romeo Doubs, who I would joke looked like an all-pro all the way up to the catch point. And then the catch point, you weren't quite sure whether it was going to be really good or not good enough.
I think that's how you describe Nelson Aguilar on here.
Yeah, probably too. That as well, But that's the thing with Doubs is that in camp he looked great. Everybody was all the spring, summer, and then what happened is that late in camp, as they're really starting to prep for the regular season, guess what they start doing? They start having a lot more 11-on-11s. They start doing a lot more of, we need you to read the defense and be on the same page with Aaron Rodgers. We need you to be able to make sure that you can make all the adjustments and all the mental adjustments of dealing with coverage and recognizing disguises and knowing what the hot is and knowing where the adjustments go late pre-snap, early post-snap. And suddenly, who's actually making plays in camp that nobody heard about all summer? Sammy Watkins. Not that Sammy Watkins stuck around, and he's had his own issues throughout his career, but it was the veterans. And then Aaron Rodgers would be in camp saying, well, if these receivers can't get on the same page with me, they're not going to be starting. And I think that's probably what happened with Polk. From the way you two laid it out, it sounds like the same footprint, which is, winning fades, catching catching passes and beating guys one-on-one and looking good in camp from that standpoint, that's impressive and that's nice. But then when it comes to the mental side of the game, that we don't get to see what exactly they were looking at, unless you get to review the tape afterwards in practice and make the determination there. That's probably the part where things got crossed up for him. And that's why the drop passes were probably happening too, because he's probably like, I'm in the right spot. I'm in the right spot. And then the ball's hitting him in the hands or bouncing off some other part of his body.
Yeah.
Well, and it was part of it also, I think, was very publicly, weeks 4 and 5, a game in San Francisco, he thought that he was in bounds on a catch and they ruled him out of bounds. And then week 5, he caught what should have been the game-winning touchdown, and he couldn't quite get his foot in bounds. And it was one of those, this is the point where we discovered the way the catch rule is written is that it's not, if you're going backwards and you just get your toe down, it doesn't count. If the heel's coming down, his toe's in, his heel's out. He thinks it's a catch. It isn't. He went on social media about those two plays, and then was it the week after or 2 weeks after they go to London? He gets targeted a ton in that game against Jacksonville, and he went like 1 of 5 or 1 of 6 on contested catches. And it was like that was what was interesting is that it was less so drops, more so once it was in traffic, he couldn't make the plays that he was making in college anymore.
Yeah.
And that stretch mentally, like he just never bounced back from that, and I don't think they trusted him in the offense either. And then that's also when Booty started to break out, so he got less playing time too.
Makes sense, and confidence is a huge factor with these young guys. I mean, that's just the pressure. The pressure's big in the NFL, and it is very different. Ben Watson once told me when I interviewed him in a different job, and I did a feature on him back at the University of Georgia when he was after he had been with the Patriots for a while. And I said, "Well, what was it like for you when you first started in the NFL? Because you were at Duke, you were in Georgia, you played ACC and SEC football, and people don't realize. I mean, my wife is an ACC girl, and she, when she first moved to Athens with me, she was a North Carolina girl, and she, basketball was king. And she'd say, everything closed down for basketball. And she said, I'm going out Saturday to go do some shopping here. I said, well, I'll see you in about 5 hours. Everything in Athens is 15 minutes apart. Okay. It's a 15-minute drive, no matter where you go in Athens. And she goes, what are you talking about? I said, the Georgia openers today. It's gonna take you 5 hours to get home. She goes, I don't believe that. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Football's a religion in Georgia. And like not the Atlanta Falcons. They're like what you watch after you watch the Georgia game or the Georgia Tech game. Like they're college football. So but that's she came home 6 hours later and she's like, yeah, I should have listened to you about that one. But like that's the thing. I asked Ben Watson about it, and he goes, it was way different. He goes, the pressure was palpable from the minute you're in the locker room before the game, because I realized these were grown men paying, getting money to pay and support their families and pay their mortgages. And he said the understanding the difference between a screw up when you're in college and the fear of a screw up in the NFL, the pressure is just ratcheted up several notches.
Yeah.
Well, if you're it's a little bit different now with the portal, but generally in college, you have a bad camp, you're going to be on the team next year, so you can grow and develop. Yeah, I felt you have a bad camp. Who knows if you're ever going to be on a roster again? Like that's it. Just
and they label you. They label you too. Like you could be a 4.3 running back who went to the Senior Bowl, who has a violently wicked stiff arm, who can catch the football and did absolutely great things, and you wind up on a camp with Ray Rice and Willis McGahee when Ray Rice is breaking out, and now you bounce through 2 teams, and then you wind up on the Cincinnati Bengals, and you spend your career at best as a special teams ace, and then Jay Gruden gets a hold of you, who's like 3 coaches in, and you get put into a game because there are 2 injuries to backs, and they need to use you, and you start rearing off big games. And a scout like me is going, I love Cedric Pierman coming out of Virginia Tech. He fumbled the ball a little too much, but he was a fantastic runner. And Jay Gruden after the game is going, we didn't really know what we had in him because he was labeled a special teamer. Right. He was a 4.3 runner at 215, 220 pounds, but they didn't know what they had him because they got him as an undrafted free agent who passed through Baltimore, Detroit, and Cleveland all in one summer. And he just stuck.
Well, and there's only so many reps to go around. You're preparing for that week's game. If you're the fourth running back, fifth running back on the depth chart, like you might touch the ball once.
Yep.
Like there's not gonna be an opportunity for them to find out who you are unless you get in the game.
And that's right. And then there's what Jordan Rodriguez calls, I think she calls it pretty pick privilege or early pick privilege, which is similar to my buddy Ryan Riddle, a former defensive end who played with Aaron Rodgers and Marshawn Lynch at Cal as the all-time single season sack record holder. He was at Bleacher Report when he talked about the hidden bias of being an early round draft pick. And it's just because teams are going to, if you invested that much money, the brass wants to give you as much opportunity to succeed or fail as possible. They're not going to hold open competitions. That's why Doug Marrone had to go to the Jaguars front office and say, I know you guys aren't happy with Leonard Fournette right now. So if so can I get permission to allow James Robinson to actually compete for a real role on this football team as the late round pick or UDFA that he was? He had to ask. He couldn't just open it up. And that's what people forget is that, these guys have to really make a huge impression on a small volume of plays. And if they actually even make a mistake, but the percentage of plays they make the mistakes on are way smaller than the early round pick, it doesn't matter because they make one or two mistakes out of they make one mistake out of 6. The GM's still going to turn and look at the coach and go, see, I told you that guy couldn't play. Right. Whereas the guy who's, the second round pick or the first round pick maybe makes 5 mistakes out of 20 plays. And they're still like, just give him some experience.
Did you see the one good one?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
it's true.
I think we've kind of outlined both sides of the Jalen Polk situation for New England next year, which is that you have to be in a position where if he was a second round pick last year, he clearly has talent. I think he belongs on an NFL field. You have to put him in a position where he can prove that he does belong, while also not being in the spot where if it doesn't work out, you have no backup option, where you're just completely out of luck. And that's the balance. That's very hard to do, especially if you're, I think with the Patriots this year, Vrabel hasn't worked with these guys. And one of the refrains from the mistakes of last year is that they leaned too much on some of the coaches for the evals. And that was Elliot Wolf coming in and doing that. So I think you're almost in a spot where all right, Vrabel doesn't know how much to trust what he's hearing about these guys from last year, good or bad, because that was clearly an issue internally of the way that they were just handling that. Yeah. So you have to have a blank slate, which works for and against these players because they didn't perform last year. So you can't be if you go in saying, all right, we're going to trust Jalen Polk's going to be our wide receiver 3. And we're going to start him and we're going to play him because we know he has the talent. There's a world where he is not making any team out of camp next year based on the production that he had. And if you're banking on him being that, now you've set yourself up for failure.
And I think that's a great point. And what it could go to is this, what you would hope for maybe as a Patriots front office guy, if you're Elliot Wolf, is maybe you talk him up in camp. And if he has a good camp, but you've determined that, look, whoever we're going to draft in 2025, if we know that they're going to be a better flanker or split end than what we got in Polk, but we talk Polk up, maybe we'll get some feelers to get some of our draft capital back. And we can maybe trade him as being part of that good class of wide receivers last year, who was that underrated guy. And maybe, we have to lose some of the value that we had spent drafting him, but we trade him away and we get some more capital for the future. And we roll with the guy that Vrabel and the company feel good about, that everybody feels good about. If that guy's playing well enough, maybe that's the hope there, or that he blows the doors off everybody, comes back and looks great, and he fits in what they need him to do.
Yeah, I agree. All right, we're gonna have to take a break and get to this year's draft. But before we do, because there's some people talking about it in the chat. Patriots obviously just traded Joe Milton, very polarizing player, right? Obviously from last year's draft. What is your opinion on Joe Milton, Matt? And do you think that the Patriots made a mistake in trading him away? If he has room to grow.
Oh, absolutely not. It was a very good choice on their end to get what they could get out of Joe Milton right now. I understand that that people love the big arm and the big body. And yes, if he could make, people are going to look and say, but he made good decisions last year in isolated moments, and that's great. But the big thing, if you're going to look historically and most people, when you're making decisions or making bets, you're doing it based on historical data. And when you look historically, it takes about 18 to 30 games to truly know what you have a quarterback. I talked before the show that I'm a Browns fan, and that Baker Mayfield, when he was drafted, and I did a Browns podcast, they knew I was a Cleveland Browns fan, and they asked me what I thought of it, and I said he's Pro Bowl Jeff Garcia. And you would have heard me. I just pretty much let all the air out of the room on Browns Radio Network when I said that, and I explained, But and then the year after, they were all excited, and they brought me back on, hoping that I would go, yeah, I was wrong. He's like, he's played really well, and I'm going to say he only played X amount of games. The defenses adjust their schemes because scouts in the NFL, college scouting is one thing. NFL scouts who watch games and help teams get their game plans, they wait 4 to 6 weeks before they start putting together intel for their coaches to start formulating game plans, because they don't want to overreact. So early on, young players, when they play their first 8 to 12 games, even 12 to 15 games, you're going to see them face coverages that aren't as well disguised for what they specifically do, because they're going to play it straight up and say, make him beat us doing what we do straight up. Then we'll watch what we think he's got weaknesses on, and we're going to incrementally start adding things to our book against this guy. And that's what happened with Mayfield. They were all excited by year 3, and he's had different offenses on top of it. So there are a lot of things that weren't on Baker. There were a lot of things that were on Baker. But one of those things is that as defenses adjusted, they started realizing, let's play him like the Georgia Bulldogs played him in the Rose Bowl, in the second half of the game, where they watched and said, let's not play zone anymore. Let's get high pressure up off the edges and make him climb a pocket and throw. And let's make him do it early. So we're going to play tight man-to-man. He's going to have to make these decisions with confidence. And that wasn't Baker Mayfield's game. And they fell apart in the second half because he was often late with throws. Even when he completed passes, they were late. And that doesn't fly in the NFL. And next thing you know, Odell Beckham's daddy's getting on the horn and telling everybody about it. But, but that's the kind of thing. So when you look at Milton, he's got all the physical and athletic attributes to succeed. I mean, his arm's one of the best I've ever seen him throwing, like a combination of distance and velocity. And people love that. So, they see that but then at the same time, they saw Zach Wilson and make throws that they were wowed by in unscripted, on a scripted pro day. But the conceptual side of the game, I mean, listen, his processing of coverage in dense areas, way too slow. He can get impatient with reads. He winds up missing slow developing routes that break open. And if you're a team that wants to run with the running back you guys have and Ramondre Stevenson, you want to run the football and you want to be able to have some slow developing play action off of that works. And if you're going to just abandon the structure of the play too early, that's going to be a problem. He was at his best with scheme plays where you get 1 to 2 reads at most, where they do a lot of little things where you get them outside and all the energy of the offense is put into one, to get one player open, maybe a second guy as a check down if you have time, if that first player doesn't get the ball. And that's great when you're scripting plays early in the game. It's great when you pull one out of your back pocket that they haven't seen in 3 games, and you can do that. But what about all those plays in between that actually matter, where it's actually part of the playbook, and you need the guy to actually match up well mentally to what's going on? And he takes a lot of hits trying to be the hero. There's a lot of hero ball in his game. Good luck to him. I hope it goes well for him in Dallas. But, this is a classic Jerry Jones. Let's get this guy. And I remember talking to some scouts also that we were talking about Joe Milton. They go, this is the classic guy. My buddy Russ Landy said this, who used to scout for the Rams and for the Browns, and who was famous for being the guy in the public sphere at that time, for being the guy who actually had a starter grade for Tom Brady, one of the only few guys who did. And Russ and I used to do a show together, and but Russ would be like, listen, Milton's a perfect guy to get at the end of a draft because he'll get people excited with all those physical skills. You can see whether you really have something in him. And if you don't, but he plays well enough in a game or two, you can probably trade him and get more than what you invested in him. So kudos to the Patriots already for getting him and getting him out. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Go ahead.
I will tell you the chat is mad at you. No idea what you're talking about. This guy. I don't know about this guy Waldman. Matt clearly. I mean, not one of the most respected scouting names in the entire NFL. We're not happy that you don't agree it was a bad trade, and so
welcome to your first step to subscribing to my product, because I had Browns fans tell me I was absolutely nuts for thinking that Nick Chubb was as good or slightly better than Saquon Barkley, or that Lamar Jackson was a quarterback, or that Patrick Mahomes was far and away the best quarterback in the draft class, or that Marvin Harrison would probably give you no better than top 35, like low end top 35 numbers this year compared to Ladd McConkey, who'd probably give you close to top 15. I mean, those are the things that it's just my process and what I look at and how I do it. And it usually differs from the norm. And usually the first thing that I hear as before people become lifetime subscribers is you're an idiot. So, nothing new.
My only addition here.
And I'm sorry, one more thing. Pat Stats, we love you, sir. 22 picks. I'm a math teacher. You cannot do that. You cannot do that. You cannot say 22 picks. The Patriots got 170 something, right? What did they get back? They moved from the top of the seventh
I think it was 177. Yeah, they moved up 50 picks or something. It was what's actually funny about it is that if you use the Rich Hill value chart, because it was Milton in a 7th for a 5th. The value of the pick swap is pick 193, which is where they took Joe Milton last year. So it's just like what they did is basically the equivalent of driving a car off the lot and then going to the dealership over and selling it for the same price you just bought the car for. That's what they just did with this, which is fine. I'm a Michigan fan. Milton was our quarterback in 2020, and after having to sit through that, I was seems like a great human being. I have no interest in him being on my football team. And to me, the big red flag was that he was at Michigan with Jim Harbaugh and then Tennessee with that offense. You just didn't really see that much of an upward trajectory in his play. It definitely got better, but these are programs that did pretty well at providing their quarterbacks opportunities for success. And the fact that he didn't really get that at either one, the way I think you could have gotten with his athletic traits, to me was a big red flag of, all right, it just probably isn't going to come together for him.
You want processors in the NFL, people who process fast. And even the S2 is not a very good example of what good processing is. You just want to look at how players look at leverage, defender on receiver leverage, who has, and how quickly and confidently they get that ball out at the leverage point that they see it at the top of their drop or with their first hitch or with their second hitch. And you want to be able to have guys who can do that well. It's why I had a good grade for Brock Purdy as a borderline starter, and when you look at the league. And so the physical skills are great, but, fans oftentimes, and it's understandable, but they see the highlight plays, they see the big plays, and they overvalue speed and they overvalue big arms. And it's kind of like, I joke that it's the cleavage of NFL fans and some bad decision makers is arm strength and speed. And certainly they have their place and their value, but there's a point where you kind of go, okay, it's diminishing returns if you don't have the rest of the skills that you're looking for that really make a difference.
Yep. All right, let's do our ad break, and then we got to talk about this year's class, because we are we're burning the midnight oil here, and we haven't even gotten to 2025. So
let's do it.
All right. So this ad, of course, is for Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks is making daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Springtime is here and baseball season is officially underway. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your Prize Picks lineup, whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs. Take your pick of more or less for your shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash today. Hopefully you had some Red Sox in your lineup today because they scored about 27 runs tonight. So hopefully you had a few guys in there. On Prize Picks, you can actually mix and match sports as well. And so that's a lot of fun because you can do hockey and you can do baseball and you can do basketball and you can do even esports and mix them all together. So what you're going to do, download the app Prize Picks, put in the promo code CLNS, and you're going to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. You don't have to win it. You just have to play it. Okay. So again, download the app Prize Picks, put in the promo code CLNS, and you're going to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right.
He heads Prize Picks. He's a UGA alum.
Look at that. See,
I interviewed him years ago when I worked there before he started Prize Picks. So good for him.
There you go. All right. UGA alum. I did not know that. All right. So let's get into this year's draft. Really, we want to talk about kind of our top five. And Matt, I think our top five is going to differ a little bit. Matt, I don't know about. Well, I'm talking to my Matt. Waldman, I think I'm curious to see what your top five looks like. We're including Travis Hunter as a wide receiver. I'm assuming your number one is Travis Hunter. My number one is Travis Hunter. I'm assuming Matt St. Jean's number one is Travis Hunter as well.
He's my number one in the whole draft.
Yeah. So I feel like, yeah. So is he your number one as well, Matt?
No, he's my number two. Actually.
Okay. All right. So who is your number one receiver then?
My number one's Luther Burden III out of Missouri.
Okay.
And I know that there are a lot of people who look at that and say, okay, well, why is that the case? Because they look at stats and they're like, oh, well, he had a worse season than the previous season. You know, you see him in an offense where he's running a lot of screens and RPOs and what's going on with that. But when you look at both of these players together, it's very close. I mean, if they're both in the top tier and they're the two top tier players that I have on my wide receiver board in terms of tier breaks, those are the two guys that you would look at. So if you're looking for a guy who can give you a little bit of everything right now as a wide receiver, in terms of playing all three roles, who can also win off the line of scrimmage without as many inconsistencies with the plan that they should take, and reduces the amount of times he's pinned to the boundary, I'd prefer Luther Burden. Because even though the reps are small, look, I get access to every game that these guys play. I've watched every game that these guys have played, and I chart what they do. I don't chart every game, but I chart a pretty decent enough sample size to see what's going on with that. And when you look at Travis Hunter gets pinned to the boundary a little too often, which you would say that's interesting for a guy who plays cornerback, who you would think would understand how to avoid that happening, since he's trying to pin guys to the boundary often. But it's easier to say that and then to actually try and do it. And I'd say with Hunter, he's a fantastic player. I mean, wins the ball, does, in contested situations, very strong route runner, conceptually very good, from the stem through the break. It's just that release against press. And when you project to the NFL, press coverage is really the point where, are you going to be a primary receiver? Well, one of the best primary wide receivers, at least in recent years up until the past couple, and I'm not saying that there's been a major downfall, but like Stephon Diggs is a perfect example of a guy that you knew, 3rd and 15, everybody knew in the stadium it was going to him. The defense knew it. They knew what route it was going to be, and he could still separate, and get you 16 yards on the play, because he had a plan of attack for how the defender was playing him one-on-one in those high leverage situations. And Burden's better at that right now than Travis Hunter is. That's the only real difference between those guys. And it's not massive. I mean, if you want Hunter over Burden, to me, that's not a big deal as long as they're in the same tier. But for Burden, what I like about him is he's great at uncovering late in the route. And it's not just late in the designed route, but where you're going to see him in the red zone or in unstructured plays where he's got to work open and he knows how to set up defenders and still communicate to his quarterback where he's going to be and uncover late. A player who did that fantastically as a rookie last year in those situations was Ladd McConkey. And you could see that early, and you could see how Justin Herbert said in the spring, this guy already plays like he's a 5-year veteran. Even in minicamp, I'm seeing that this guy already has that because we're on the same page with how we see the defense and where we want to go. And I think Burden has more of that right now than Hunter does. Again, it's a small margin. And if you're going to value run after the catch, special teams, and the fact that he can play cornerback, at least situationally, if you're not going to have him be at full time, Travis Hunter is the most versatile player in this draft. So that's understandable. But if you're looking for a wide receiver who can give you strong flanker play and run good, sharp routes, who can also be a split end if you need him to be, and he can go downfield and he can win, against tight man-to-man coverage, and then also off script, he can uncover in compressed areas of the field late. You're getting a future Brandon Ayuk, like a healthy version of a future Brandon Ayuk. Whereas with, I think, Travis Hunter, you're getting possibly, the upside for him would be a better version of Chris Olave, who I really liked. Either way, I look at both those guys and say, depending on what you're looking for in your offense, that's great.
Yeah.
I like it. Burden, for me, his profile, not as a player, but just like as a prospect, he reminds me a little of what Jordan Addison was coming out, in that he didn't have his best statistical year the year before the draft. Like, Addison had almost 1,600 yards as a sophomore, transfers, and then is under 900 that next year. Burden had over 1,200 yards in 2023 and under 700 last year. And it was a weird situation with the quarterback and the offense there in Missouri. So it kind of felt like I didn't know what to do with his evaluation, because I honestly didn't get into the 2023 stuff. I was just looking at the 2024, and it was okay. I don't know how to mesh what I'm being told about what he is as a player with what I'm seeing this year in this offense. I know some stuff has been brought up about like attitude with him, not even necessarily in a negative way, but he was frustrated that he wasn't getting the ball in that offense, that they were out of games in the way the season was going, and that kind of snowballed, which you do make the Stephon Diggs comparison as a player, and the attitude sounds a little bit similar too.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, I watched both 2023 and 2024 tape of him, and I had a good grade for him in 2024 because, again, when, some people will say, well, all I saw was RPOs and screens. But a lot of the stuff that I described, I saw on tape in 2024. A lot of the deep stuff, a lot of the routes that are well run. And sometimes what people are looking at are, if people are looking at highlights, they're not going to see as much. But if you're actually studying every play and every route, and you're judging the routes that they run, and you go, that route broke open. He was facing man coverage in this situation. What technique did he perform here against this high-low situation in this? Did he use a stair step correctly? Does he hold the stair step long enough in terms of how he holds that route? Does he use peaks and insets? Does he have flat drive steps and line steps to be able to generate these types of breaks? Does he get at the top of the stems at full speed to actually break on these routes? And when you look at the techniques, because scouting really at its core is about the technique, the concepts, the athletic ability that players use to be able to put themselves or their teammates in position to make positive plays. That's how I look at scouting. Everything is funneled towards that. It's not whether they got 100 yards receiving against Notre Dame. Right. It's not whether they caught the ball. It's, that's part of it in some ways, but it's about whether or not they put themselves or their teammates in position for a positive play to happen. And if you do that, now you're looking at all the process rather than the results. This processes look very good, and that's so from from that standpoint. And Jordan Addison, by the way, I mean, he was my number 3 receiver in that draft class and had an instant starter grade as a player that could come right away. And I had him, comped as a guy that was similar to like T.Y. Hilton and Devonta Smith. My comp for him was I thought he was on par with Devonta Smith And I value T.Y. Hilton higher than both those guys. Maybe he didn't give you the stats based on these offenses, but you guys saw plenty of T.Y. Hilton, and you understood, in a good, when he was used the way that he could be and he was healthy, he could be a primary receiver in the league at his size.
Yeah. Hey, listen, that's a bold take, and I like it. That's what we're here for. I have Burden as my 5.
I also had Burden as my 5.
I actually feel really good about. He's a guy that I haven't gotten onto a mock draft yet, and I want to. I've been wanting to, because I really like the guy, and he's one of those. You mentioned late in games or late in late in the play getting open, and I don't watch a ton of film, but I watched the BC game against Missouri, huge game for BC, and they ended up losing. But, that was a game that they were hanging with him for a while. And I was like, okay. And Luther Burden was kind of quiet. And I was like, all right, they're shutting him down. And then all of a sudden it's like, catch, touchdown. I'm like, where the hell did this guy come from? And so, it happened quick to BC. And so I think he ended up with 6 for 117 and a touchdown. Again, not that the stats matter, but when you're watching it, you just you see it, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, they're shutting him down and stop, and then no, they weren't. So
when they needed him to make an impact. He made an impact. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So, all right. So my second, I don't know if your second's same, Matt, but my second is Ted McMillan.
Yeah,
it was challenging to put McMillan here because I don't love him, but that's where I put him at number 2. Is that where you put him as well, Matt St. Jean?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And for me, it was Hunter as 1, and then McMillan, Abuka, Golden, and Burden kind of all roughly in the same tier, and kind of pick your flavor. And I just put McMillan at the top because he has physical traits that you can't teach. And I liked, the high end stuff of his tape is so good that you can, you can think, okay, if you can coach the rest of it up, he can be a really good receiver. But talking about press, he is, I think, inconsistent might be the most charitable word to describe him against press from game to game in his tape. I love the way he has feel for it, though. I do like Ted McMillan against zone. I thought he had some really nice moments on tape of feeling where the opening was going to be and getting there on time with the quarterback. Where do you land with him?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, Travis Hunter's my number 2. So, Tet's my number 5, actually, on my board here. And a lot of that does have to do with how I value press coverage. What I do with the RSP, for those of you who are wondering, especially if you think I smoke crack based on some of the responses that you guys are alluding to, which is often the case, again, as I said with early on, is that, I've been doing this 20 years, and I have a process where I literally look, everything's defined, everything's weighted in value. People who read the RSP get to see how I define everything I look at, and I'm looking at over 100 points of criteria for pretty much every position that I study. And so with wide receiver, a lot of it's based on guys who are, a lot of it I learned and evolved through over the years, and then some of it even consulting with a guy like Drew Lieberman, who coached Julian Edelman, who coached Mohamed Sanu, Dontavian Wicks, players along those lines. Who worked at Rutgers and worked at Wesleyan and places like that. So anyway, when you look at a guy like McMillan, the issues that I have with him is that, press coverage is important. You've got to be able to win that, especially if you're going to be an X. And so I saw that either at the top of stems or at the beginning of his release, he had difficulty separating. And so that has even bled into some of his zone routes against shallow zone coverage. He's just got to be savvier about what's the 3 defenders in the zone triangle, which is usually, 2 defensive backs and a linebacker of some sort that you're going to have to deal with. And he has to know when to settle between defenders rather than tempo toward one side where a defender is and then work back to the ball. He's minimizing separation. You saw this specifically in the Utah and Colorado games multiple times. He also has some lapses with attacking the football. As good of his catches can be, he clap attacks targets. I mean, everybody who's ever played Pop Warner football learns that, you want to use that diamond type of, catch pattern. or use your finger. You want your fingertips together, whether it's your thumbs and your index fingers or it's your pinkies. You want to be able to extend and have your hands together to do that. Sometimes it's very hard to do that when you're making athletic plays. So you're going to see lots of players in the league who occasionally end up clapping the ball, but you don't want to be doing it side to side. You don't want to be using the palms of your hands. You want to use fingertips. These are wonderfully engineered to stop the spin of the ball. And when you can slow the spin of the ball and you don't catch it right away, when you use your fingertips, the ball actually careens and ricochets off your hand, a very soft bounce, which gives you an easy opportunity to catch a floating ball on a second opportunity. When it hits the broad side of the barn on, of your palms, it ricochets much more violent. And that's why you see guys have difficulty catching when those types of things happen. And McMillan has some clap attacks on a variety of targets where he's just not looking the ball all the way into his frame. He's often too focused on transitioning downfield as a ball carrier when that happens. So he's got to, these are things that are absolutely workable. I have a starter grade for him. Come right in and you can start. But if you're going to look at like things that might hurt, well, the wide extension clap attacks, same thing that Marvin Harrison Jr. had that I've talked about, saying, I'd much rather have Malik Neighbors 8 days out of 7. Basically, at any point, there's a clear separation between those guys because he can run routes and he knows how to catch a football. Whereas, Harrison, great at tracking over his shoulder, not so great when he had to go up and extend with his arms for the ball and win jump up and through back shoulders and things like that. And guess what they asked him to do? They asked him to be that classic X who does that with a quarterback in Kyler Murray, who basically historically has only been able to feed one receiver successfully in each game more often than not, as opposed to supporting multiple receivers because he's too busy running around out there at certain junctures in an unwise way. So McMillan, those two things he's got to kind of clear up: the separation skills and the clap attacking, where you're going to look at him, and I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to see some fantastic catches and some big games, and then you're going to see stretches where it's like, he dropped that? He needs to catch that to be that kind of receiver in the NFL. So, he may have a little bit of growth ahead of him, but it's not – I'd be confident in taking him as an immediate starter who can be like a slot flanker or a slot X. You can kind of combine him in either direction, but I don't think he's a true X. I think he's better as like an inside out guy on a team. He would be at his best there.
All right. So your fifth guy is a starter, which means you have how many like plug and play starters do you have? Like where does that list end?
Yeah, I would say that ends probably at, I would say in theory that ends probably with about 12 players. There's 12 players. Now, I would say in terms of guys that are probably going to be plug and play starters, I would say most likely that's more like 5 receivers. Okay. Because from the way that tier looks. So I would say most likely you're dealing with those first 5, and McMillan is the bottom end of that.
Okay. Well, there you go. All right. Well, with that being said, who is number 3 on your list? I guess let's go back to your list and go to number 3. Okay. Just who the hell wants to hear our list? What the hell cares? I mean, for me, everyone already knows Matt. Mine's the same. So, who is your number 3?
Texas is Matthew Golden. Okay. Were you guys similar on that or not?
Yeah, I have him 4, but it's I
also had him 4. My issue with Golden to me is that like he does a lot of things I like on a football field, and I'm not quite sure how they all come together at the NFL level in a successful way. Because like I love him as an athlete. I think he's got great body control, but he's so protected in that offense from ever having to deal with press alignments, or like he gets to start every play on the move. And it's just kind of hard to figure out what he looks like in an offense where he's not going to be doing that every play, where he might be the primary target. Like, my read on him is I feel like he could be a really, really high-end number 2, but he also might just be a really boom-bust player his entire career from game to game.
And I think that could be very accurate in both ways, because if they use him as more of a classic split end, as like a Henry Ruggs-esque, just run down the field as fast as you can and win some jump balls. If they're going to limit him to that, that could end up being the case for him. But if they use him more as, another guy that I would comp him to is like Jaden Reed, and you can use him at multiple positions. He could probably give you a lot of good production there. He's very good at attacking his stems at full speed on intermediate and routes, and he's very good at being able to sell that phase of the route, which means that deep threat, a lot of deep threats fail to sell that phase, and it makes them very predictable in coverage. Golden is not as predictable in coverage because of that. I think his breaks are competent at worst, very good at best, depending on the type of coverage that he's facing and the type of break you're looking for. He attacks the ball at very early windows. He's good at being able to win against contact. He wins contested plays. Jump up and throughs are pretty good, which are the back shoulder plays. And what I'm talking about is like you're jumping straight up in the air, turning and attacking the ball, usually on an underthrown ball or a designed underthrow. Stephon Diggs excels at that. And it shows also that you don't need to be tall to win those type of plays. A lot of the tall guys who get a lot of the love make the plays, again, that the fans love. But they're doing these, walking catches way behind them and extending their bodies late. You know what they're doing? They're late tracking the football when they do that. That's not a good thing. They've opened up their entire body for the defender to reach in and defend the ball, whereas you want to jump up straight up and down so that you've attacked the ball early enough to make that high point catch so that your feet hit the ground and you can actually maybe run or control your feet at the boundary and also box out the defender. Stephon Diggs excels at that. Matthew Golden's pretty good at that. I don't think he's desirable as a split end, but, with his releases, you're right that you didn't get to see a lot of that, but the techniques that we're looking for that where I've seen him against guys, he's got a good feet switch. He's got a 2-quick combo that's good. His stick and counters against defenders' hands with the shoulder reduction are pretty good. His read steps and lean-ins are good against tight coverage at the top of stems that project well to what you would do at the line. So there's some skills there that I think that he can develop in that range that I'm not as concerned about. And again, we're looking at, the difference between, him and Tet is very small. So yeah, but that's the thing. I think I agree with you. He's probably more of a slot flanker type of guy who can give you some looks vertical.
For me, the team that I was looking at for a fit here in the, they shouldn't, but it would maybe make sense if Miami were to take him, because I feel like if Miami was going to say we're going to move off of Tyreek Hill now and try to replace that, I feel like that would make a lot of sense. That offense, I think, would be horribly irresponsible if that franchise used a first-round pick on a wide receiver with where they are. But that's par for the course with them these days.
Yeah,
right.
That's true. Also, TJ has been a big hater, but he's encouraging you to stay with the scouting. He says, "Don't quit your day job." And so apparently he thinks you're doing a great job scouting.
I think he thinks I live in my mom's basement and do this, on the often, but that's okay. I appreciate it.
So this is his day job, actually. So, so here we are. By the way, I just got a text from my dad, loyal listener. I will quote it to you. This guy really gets into detail. Very good. So who cares about the chat? That my dad has no idea about the draft, and so he's very much appreciative of all the detail. And so
there you go.
So who's number 4 for you, Matt? We'll talk about number 4 here on your list. We got 5 as Tet, and so who is number 4?
Isaiah Bond, the Texas receiver. And I know that there's questions about, a lot of the stuff that fans get upset about are like, it's all narrative stuff. It's like, well, he kind of faded and Matthew Golden took over on the, in terms of the production late in the season, that kind of thing. And I understand that. But when you look at Isaiah Bond at Alabama and you look at him at Texas, very good route runner, really flat breaks, sharp breaks. He accelerates into the top of his stem very well. He's probably one of the only receivers in this class that when you actually watch him accelerate, it's so palpable to see that, I mean, you don't need to look at times to really understand how fast this guy can get up to top speed, and that's a quite a valuable trait. There's a lot of, skill in terms of being able to win the ball. He's not someone, he has some issues catching the ball a little bit with specific types of targets that are at a certain point away from his frame where he can tend to fight the ball a little bit, but it's isolated to those. Most of the time, very good receiver, uncovers very well, quite good awareness from the boundary, excels after the catch. To me, he's closer to T.Y. Hilton, the guy that we talked about earlier, than pretty much anybody in this class. I think he can be that type of player, not just a classic, run go routes down the field and let's throw 50-50 balls to this guy, or hopefully we get him open on a post route off of a play action pass. So Bond at Texas, to me, was one of those guys that, if the off the field isn't an issue, this is a very strong player on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me, because I definitely don't have him nearly this high, and I think a lot of that was like first of all, I just don't think I saw the acceleration the same way, so maybe I need to go back and rewatch some of that with fresh eyes. I always get concerned with smaller guys, and like I will say I didn't necessarily love Xavier Worthy last year, and to me Bond was just kind of slightly worse at every single thing as I'm going through my checklist there, and I was just like, I just don't. Again, you have to feel like he's a boom bust guy, and there's a world where the speed doesn't translate to the NFL when you introduce NFL physicality, and I just feel like I wasn't quite sure how he contributes if it doesn't translate.
Sure.
Clearly, you don't. Do you not have those concerns, or?
No, I don't. His acceleration literally, like, it looked like fire coming off the film. I mean, it was like that guy, and I wasn't the only one. I remember, good friend of mine, Chad Ryder, who works over at NFL.com. After I finished my scouting and we're just getting a chance to chit chat, we'd kind of meet up and so what'd you think of Isaiah Bond? And one of the first things he said, he was like, God, the acceleration is just palpable. Like and I laugh. I was like, yeah, I mean, like, to me, like the aspirational comp for him, that he'll probably never get there, but the aspirational comp was Isaac Bruce to me, or a modern day comp was if Marvin Mims knew how to run routes and Sean Payton didn't have to fit him into his offense to be kind of a pseudo Lance Moore version of pseudo version of Lance Moore with a booster seat and some training wheels, he would probably be closer to Isaiah Bond, because at the catch point, they're very good. But, when I look at the releases, one of the things that I see is he's got a very good blade release, which is when you reduce the shoulder and then you shed upward to counter the hands of a defender. He does that with violence. He has a good wipe that's very decisive against inside leverage. When defenders are playing there, his double up with a shoulder reduction or wipe counter is also good. Has a good 2 quick at the top of his stems. He also uses the 2 quick or 3 quick very well to steal releases in the run game. So when they're not throwing the ball and you're trying to set up defenders, you're actually throwing releases at them to see what they do so that you can then set them up in the passing game. I would say that, he has a ton of moves that I saw that are very sharp, and he does them pretty well. I think that, the things that maybe that he's going to have to work with is maybe certain plays where he can be a little bit more patient with his release, because he leans on his speed a little bit more. So that's going to take a bit of time. But the route running itself, really liked. And there's a play at Alabama I watched that was just fantastic, just as something that just kind of comes off jumps off the frame for me late in the game. I think it was against Auburn, where he's in the left corner of the end zone and he uncovers there with the ball in the air, like late, like the ball's been in the air forever. And he literally sets up that defender a lot like Luther Burden to uncover late, knowing that the defender doesn't know the ball's there, but he does, and makes, basically an acrobatic catch at the left boundary, win that ball in tight coverage with the awareness that he showed to do that was really nice. And I mean, so, and the way they use him, on RPOs and screens and also fly sweeps and things like that, you can see him turn a corner, and it's pretty sweet. The big thing with him is he, there has been whispers, and again, that's why I gave you the Jimmy Smith example. There's whispers that he can be a bit of a diva, like a lot of wide receivers can be. So is it Jermaine Burton early, who's not going to work at his craft early on, or is it really, is it more Isaac Bruce like, who had a little bit of that in him, throughout his career?
When somebody, I don't remember who it was, and I don't know exactly how reputable the comment is, but I saw somebody say that it was Jermaine Burton-esque. That was the player they used to compare for Isaiah Bond, and obviously that has not worked out for Cincinnati.
No, and that's we'll see what happens in year 2, and also we have to understand too that the thing that often happens with draft media is that when something bad happens, then we're going to use that last thing to compare to the thing that may look like that to them in the future, so that they can avoid it. But what often happens is we see overreactions to it, where we see somebody not do very well, and now we're going, oh, well, Patrick Mahomes is more like this. And I watched that LSU game, and he's just too wild, and everything he does is just too reckless. When you actually watch his tape, and Mark and I did a show with that years ago, where we talked about how actually daring he was as opposed to reckless. And I think that's worked out.
Yeah, I like that. So actually, Nelson has a super question here, or super chat question, I guess. Do you have anything on Ricky White, Trey Harris, or Antoine Wells? And then this is the question we're going to get into next, which is any top late round sleepers for you, but specifically these 3: Ricky White, Trey Harris, or Antoine Wells. And then, even I would say late round sleepers, but even like guys that, might be a little bit higher on your board than some other people's boards that maybe are going to go day 2, not necessarily even day 3.
Sure. With Ricky White, very good route runner. What you want to see is whether or not the speed is going to be enough there for him to play a role on the outside. But he's a good route runner. He tracks the ball reasonably well. He has everything you want skills-wise to develop into a starting NFL receiver. What you don't know is whether the athletic ability is there. Trey Harris, he's reasonably high on my board, and he's someone that I would say, he's just less consistent as a pass catcher than you would like to see. He has a lot of clap attacks with the target. As a route runner, you don't see a lot of bend with his game. So you're not really looking at him as your primary receiver. You're looking at him as more of a zone specialist and a fade route jump ball type of guy who could end up being a nice number 2 option. Think like Quentin Johnston without the drop issues, or maybe Alshon Jeffrey, as in a good year when he was healthy and thin enough. Harris has some good skill after the catch, so there's some abilities there. And then Juice Wells, think of like a Sean McVay offense where you have those slow developing crossing routes and over routes, in a Van Jefferson sort of way, where you can get loose down the field. Off play action is the second or third read, and the veteran quarterback hits them 40 yards down the field. Except that I think Juice will actually catch some of those balls and track them a little bit better. Van always he runs routes very well, but like his pops, who was a wide receiver coach and played for the Patriots, what I'm talking about. We
know him quite well. Yes, we do.
He was a Romeo Dubs before Romeo Dubs in a lot of experiences there.
Yeah.
So I think that from a Juice Wells standpoint, he can give you a little bit more possibly down the line, but he's really confined to being more of a zone route runner who can win after the catch or using them on screens and RPOs. Guys I like better than most: Andrew Armstrong of Arkansas. He's 6'4", 202. He played at UTEP 3 years ago, and then he played last year. He's had 2 strong statistical seasons. But when you watch tape, what you see is kind of a mix between Hakeem Nicks and Josh Reynolds. Okay, like 2 guys who could start in the NFL, run good routes, use their length well, track the ball over their shoulders fine, win the back shoulder fades. But he also works the middle well, runs flat routes, can run those dig routes and break tackles after the catch. My biggest concern was how fast he was going to be. I knew he was quick enough. He's got that 4.18, 20 shuttle, 6.97 3-cone drill. He can get early separation on you. It's whether or not he can really extend the field afterwards. Around a 4.5 140. That's not great, but you're not asking him to be the primary guy. Marvin Jones Jr. ran a 4.51. I think he had a pretty good career, and could play all three positions. You didn't hear much about Armstrong because he dealt with a hamstring injury early this season, so he didn't start off great. Then after that, I would be surprised if he either turned down opportunities or what happened with his brother maybe was a reason why he didn't go to any All-Star games, because he has an older brother who suffered from some debilitating mental illness issues, and and lives in Texas. His name was Arthur Armstrong, and Arthur Armstrong, unfortunately, after the police being able to successfully get him hospitalized on multiple occasions, this time when they called the police, like at the end of the season, he was armed and he ended up shot and killed. And it happened literally I think a week, within weeks of the season ending. So I don't think, I'm sure Andrew Armstrong was probably focused on just being there for his family, and trying to train for the NFL Combine, which he did get invited to. A guy that I know nobody's talking about that I like is Kelly Akiri out of Mississippi State, who was also at UTEP. And he was he's 6 feet, 6'1", 200, excellent ball tracker, good speed, route skills, unlikely to be drafted, but I think he's skilled enough to surprise. Kind of gives you a DeAndre Hopkins-esque type of profile, not necessarily that quality of player, but in that realm. And if he has more speed than Hopkins and turns out to be speedier, that player might be a guy like Roddy White, who in his prime, that would be the kind of thing there. Guys that, other guys that I think are worthwhile. If you're really looking for an X in this draft and at a bargain, look at Isaiah Neyor of Nebraska. He's 6'4", 218, ran a 4.40 at the combine, jumped 38 inches. He played at Wyoming early in his career and was wiping the floor with people as a vertical route specialist, who could run after the catch in open field, win the contested balls, can also work over the middle. And then he ended up at Texas with Steve Sarkisian's program, and Steve Sarkisian was pretty much almost giddily bragging about his pair of receivers, Xavier Worthy and Isaiah Neyor, and Neyor tore his ACL. And it took him a couple years to really get up to full speed. He was at Nebraska these past 2 years, and he started to really look good this year. I think that, if you think of Nico Collins as a guy who had a better pro career than a college career, and also similar type of player, Neyor could have been a lot higher on my board if I actually, after watching all of his games, saw him in situations where he had to run in traffic and could actually be in a situation where he could set up blockers and make them miss. If I don't see certain things, I can't give him credit for doing it. You either project it, and I like to project based on what I see, not on what hasn't been there to show. So it's very possible he could have been one of my top 12 to 15 receivers on this board. Instead, he's just outside my top 20, but I think he's a compelling player and definitely worthwhile there, in terms of what the Patriots might be looking for from a player. And then, Brew McCoy, if you want an outside receiver, he's not unbelievably flashy, runs a 4.5, but he's a skilled route runner. He's a pro's pro with timing routes. Think a healthy Juju Smith-Schuster, a young Juju Smith-Schuster, or Hakeem Nicks. Again, guys that you can put on an island, in your, basically in 11 personnel or in 10 personnel, and you can put him outside, man up against one guy. Hopefully the safety's not playing over the top there, and you can let him win one-on-one against somebody and do well for you and give you some skill after the catch. He understands really how to produce downfield against zone coverage too. Just a good overall guy. I mean, there's a ton of receivers you're going to see in this class. They're going to have a wide variety because with all the 7-on-7 football, all the flag football, all the more frequency of seeing players getting coached by wide receiver coaches, they're going to get more and more tools. But how to use them? I mean, a lot of these guys listening probably have been on a job site as a contractor or anything else. There's some, I come from a family of folks who do that type of work. And, look, there are sometimes you can see someone come onto a job site and they have a toolbox full of brand new tools and don't know really how to use 3/4 of them. And then you got the old man out there who's got the hammer and probably can use the hammer 5 different ways better than they can use 5 different tools, and sub for some of those tools and do a better job. And I think that's what's missing right now with a lot of these wide receiver classes is that the bell curve, you have more guys who are in that middle area, but doesn't mean more of those guys are actually going into the top. They just have more skill. They have more in their tool box, but not enough skill to actually use them. So we have more guys that draftniks are going, this guy could be good. Like Ty Felton, who looks like a fantastic route runner, and he is a fantastic route runner. But there are more reasons why he drops the ball in terms of bad habits and things that you can identify than why he actually catches it. If he can figure that out, he might be the next Stephon Diggs. I mean, he's like that good as a route runner and what he can do after the catch. But catching the football, there's things like that. So there's a lot of guys in this draft that are going to be like that.
I like it.
I think the 2 other names, you could be quick on these, but just 2 guys the Patriots have met with multiple times in the process, which stood out to me. Jalen Noel from Iowa State is one of them. And then Kyle Williams, I believe is his name, the Washington State guy. What jumped out to me immediately is that these are smaller slot guys. So going all the way back up to the top of the podcast, where we said the Patriots do know how to scout the slot guys. It seems like they're looking at players in that mold.
Well, that's fascinating, but that tells you that I was hoping that Vrabel would after his time away would kind of free himself from the Belichick Incorporated kind of way of looking at things. So maybe that's what they're doing, but they're just playing their poker, and that you're not going to see them pick any of those guys. But I like Jalen Noel. To me, Jalen Noel is like the discount version of Matthew Golden, and he's not that far away in terms of talent. He's good in the middle of the field. He's someone that catches the ball well. He has excellent acceleration, someone who can win with a variety of routes, and you can see him being maybe a flanker, but he's that Stephon Diggs flanker slot type of, archetype. And then who was the other guy that you mentioned?
Washington.
Kyle Williams. Yeah, Kyle Williams. Excellent speed, fights the ball a lot of clap attacking, a lot of issues at the catch point. If he can fix that, he could be very good, very skilled after the catch. So you can see that he's got that NFL athletic ability, and the route running is something that could come along and make him a worthwhile starter as long as he cleans up the catch point.
Two guys that I had a question about. One, it's funny you mentioned Arkansas, because one of the guys that I love as a late round guy for the Patriots is Isaac. I think it's Tesla.
Yeah.
Tesla. I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced. And then Jaden Higgins, I think, is kind of that perceived to be an early second round, perhaps even end of the first round guy. So it's just, and those are that kind of prototypical size-wise, prototypical X receiver. Whether they can actually do that or not, who knows? But at least size-wise, they look like that. Just curious about what you thought about those 2 guys.
Higgins was my number 6 receiver, so he was not that far away from my top 5 at all. One thing different, and he might have been 4th or 3rd. Based on what we're looking at. So the thing with Higgins is that he has some of the best mitts in the class. I mean, he can go up and win the ball. He can win it in contested fashion. He has good ball. He has good technique with his attacks. He understands how to attack the football. There are some routes when he has a plan and he understands how he wants to play it, and he's right about how he wants to play it, that the quickness shows up. The footwork shows up. He's precise. He's skilled with what he does. And then there are some routes where it looks like he's running in concrete because he doesn't really quite have the plan yet. But I would rather see someone. I'm good with projecting players to the league who've shown that when they get it, that they do get it on occasion. They just have to get better at those things. I saw him as a T. Higgins type, Mike Williams type of guy that you win at the boundary. Fans will say, "Oh, he'd be a number 1 somewhere else," and you go, "No," but he's an excellent complement who can give you, leading production in games on occasion if you need them. And so, Higgins makes sense. Isaac Tesla, you look at him, and I would say he falls in right now is that Kenny Golladay, Chase Claypool type of player. Big, strong, fast, can track the ball, wins after the catch, but route running, route setups, reading the coverage correctly. Those are things that he's going to need some work with. So if you put him in that situation where he's got two good receivers buffering him, and you can match him up in the middle, he's going to be that guy that fans go nuts over and say, "Oh, he's the next great thing." And then, I remember watching Chase Claypool and writing about him after week 6 and saying, "Okay, here's what's happening, Pittsburgh fans. He's the third option that the defense is prioritizing. When they play zone, they're shifting their looks, and people are sliding over early on to attack Deontay Johnson or Juju Smith-Schuster. They're not looking at him. The players that are getting matched against him are not playing him tight enough at the boundaries, and he's winning over their heads. That's all going to change after what I saw in week 7, And week 7, they played him. The Titans, I think, played him tighter. And then we never heard from Chase Claypool again, other than on the news about where he was going. Yeah. And Kenny Golladay, when he was asked to be the Giants wide receiver, we saw what happened there too.
Yeah.
So, Tesla could do that. He could become a better player. But what he's going to have to understand that those guys didn't is that when you get your early production, don't think you made it in the NFL. Keep working. Keep trying to become a full-fledged option, because someone's going to count on you to do that based on your stats, and they're going to have bought a bill of goods.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to have time to get to the tight ends the way we're hoping. I do have one specific tight end, though, who I feel like is particularly divisive, and I wanted to ask your opinion of him.
Sure.
And that's Harold Fannin Jr.
Sure.
How high are you on him?
He's my number 3. I think he's my number 3 on the board. Let me take a look real quick.
Just to confirm, Warren and Loveland are your 1 and 2, yes?
Nope.
Okay.
Loveland and Mason Taylor. I'm a Mason Taylor fan, actually.
Okay.
Warren is my 5th, mainly because people overstate his blocking ability. He is, people like to talk a lot about blocking, and you'll hear a lot of draftniks say, well, if the effort's there, he's going to learn what he needs to do. No, he's not going to win hugging people. He's got to learn how to throw a punch. You want to see someone actually set up straight and actually deliver their hands with an uppercut and actually roll through their hips when they do it, not hold their hands wide and hug them. You're going to draw more penalties than actually good attaboys for what you're doing with that. Not that he can't block, but he has more problems than you'd expect. He's more of a Tyler Kraft type of player who he certainly can win those contested catches, and people love that. But, I would say while sure-handed and powerful, he's better in zone coverage and in high leverage contested coverage targets in the short area of the field. You know who also fans loved a lot, who kind of fits that realm a little bit, but maybe was a better blocker, was that kid from 2 years ago from the Raiders.
Michael
Mayer, who was my tight end 7, who I still had a contributor grade for, but he wins in zone. He doesn't win against man. Top end tight ends win against man. Meanwhile, you talked about Harold Fannin. Well, the guy I had tight end 3 was Sam Laporta. And I had a scout actually write me and laughing because he said, what you said about Sam Laporta was so true, because people don't realize this in the NFL, is that sometimes the coaches and the GMs aren't on the same page often enough, and they have a spitting match about players. And so what ends up happening is a coach is like, I don't want a Sam Laporta type. He's a wide receiver and a slightly bigger body. I need a blocker. And that's what my scheme's about. And then the coach, the GM's like, well, I really want this guy. He could be a game changer for what we do in the receiving game. And they draft him anyway. And then the coach says, oh, so that's what you want? Sure, I'll put him in my lineup, but I'm going to ask him to gain 20 pounds. And now he's like a short, slow blocker who can't really hold up. And they go, see, I told you should have drafted one of my guys, And I was saying, if as long as he goes onto a team where that doesn't happen, he's going to be one of the better receivers in this class because he runs, his short area speed, his short area acceleration, his short area quickness, change of direction quickness, and his route running are receiver-like. And if you use him as that second option in 2 receiver sets, or you use them outside and you can split them outside, or you can use them in that fashion, he's going to deliver for you. Harold Fannon's numbers are very similar at the combine to Sam Laporta's. There's hardly any difference from that perspective other than long speed. And if you go watch Sam Laporta's big plays, Harold Fannin would have won those as well because they were sneaking behind the defense. It wasn't like he was winning post routes against a cornerback, playing him tight. So what you get from Fannin is someone who, if you get the right system, then it works well. And see, that's the thing. The reason why you'll look at my takes and you'll go, what's this guy talking about sometimes, is that you've spent so much time watching big media draft where they're trying to also project where these guys go. So they talk to scouts and GMs and they're trying to tell you not only about this player, but they're also wanting to tell you where he's going to get drafted. They care about where he's drafted. And that's a good thing. That's a media oriented reporting thing. I'm not trying to be a reporter. I'm trying to tell you just purely about talent. My book, at the second half of my book that comes out the end of May, the second week of May after the draft, then I start talking about fit and I re-rank these players based on where they're fitting. So this gives me the opportunity to be able to say things like what I've talked about tonight and just worry about on the field rather than going, well, I can't talk about Luther Burden being my number one when I know that everybody that I've talked to in the NFL says that these guys are probably going to go first. I get that, but I don't care about that, so that's kind of the difference. And that's why I'm going to be wrong about players just like everybody else. I've certainly had my share of that, but I've also had my share of guys that, people go, don't quit your day job. And for the reasons that I've done that, I've been able to quit my day job years ago and do this. So,
yeah. Well, and I think the big thing that people forget about scouting, and really when we talk about really scouting, is that, as you mentioned, you're going to be wrong a lot.
Yeah.
And one thing that you have to do is trust your evaluations and trust your process. And listen, we have Thor Nystrom on every year for our draft recap.
And he gave the subscriber.
Yeah, let's see. There you go. So he gave the Patriots an F last year, and people were pissed. How could you give them an F, Jalen Pope? Like on and on and on and on and on. And it's like, well, turns out he was pretty right about the F. Obviously, the Drake May pick, great pick. All the other picks, terrible, right? He hated the Caden Wallace pick, hated the Jalen Polk pick, hated the Layden Robinson pick, hated a ton of them, right? And people were pissed. And and it was like, well, yeah, of course you're upset. Our team just drafted these guys. You don't want to hear that we missed on all these players. And and we'll see, of course, what happens. We don't know, right? We need really a 3-year snapshot, I think, but for me, it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, after 1 year, you feel a little bit of vindication. And I think, even the best guys, even the guys that get paid millions of dollars to do this every year are going to miss on players. They're going to, they're going to miss on guys. They're going to come up with it and say, this guy is my number one guy. And, it doesn't matter. And and they're going to miss on him. That's just what happens.
I'll end with a story that I can't give you the name of the player, but he's in your conference, and I guarantee you that pretty much every team wishes they had this player. Okay. And I'll just say this, that this player was invited for a workout with an AFC team. And he just was unbelievable in the interview, unbelievable in the mental phases of the game that they did on the whiteboard. And then they had basically an 11-on-11 scrimmage with him, with veterans who were working it, but they didn't have a linebacker available. So one of the coaches had to play the linebacker in this situation. So the player threw a touchdown pass, and he threw it over the guy playing linebacker whose back was turned to him. And he had already lit up practice. And the veterans were all just loving on him. And when he scored there, they were all cheering. And the coaching staff at that time, which is no longer there, was like, that's not a good play. You should have followed this, should have checked here, because that's, and the player said, well, the guy's back was to me. How do I not throw that? That's leverage. That's good leverage, basically. He said it in a way that rhymed with touchdown, but basically, showed what was happening. And the players, the veterans, were all chanting that, and then they got into it, like they had a debate about it, like the coach and the player, and they were so turned off by the fact that he made that choice on the field after having such an incredible interview, after having incredible tape, after having an incredible career, that they took him off their draft board. Crazy. And he plays in their division and whoops their ass every year. So I mean, it's again, and these are storied coaches with strong careers who know a lot. It's a very difficult game to know, and we go from there. And the best thing that I would just recommend to people is it's good to have a detailed process with what you do. Mm-hmm. And because when you make a mistake, why you made the mistake. If you listen to somebody else who maybe fans like because they like their suit, they like how they speak, they like that they played football somewhere that they heard of, whatever it is, they made some good points superficially about something, or they made some really good points about one or two things, that's fine. But you don't know what their process is and how they watch tape and how they study what they know and what they don't. So if you screw up because you followed them, you don't know why they were wrong. Right. So the fastest way to get better at what you do is to define what it is that you're going to do and stick with it. And what you may surprise yourself with is that suddenly you have ideas about players that differentiate yourself from other people because you stay true to your process, because you're going to learn faster. And then when you're right because you know why you were right, as opposed to guessing, what the other thing is. So, I mean, that's just my recommendation to anybody who's out there who wanting to learn how to scout the game, is that you've got to stay true to that path. And if you do that, you'll actually learn faster and you'll learn more important lessons.
I like it. It's great advice. That's great advice. All right, Matt, we have crossed over to tomorrow. And so we're gonna let you go, and thank you so much for your time, where you graced us with a ton of time. And we are very appreciative of it. Before you go, though, can you plug yourself and tell everyone where they can read you and see you and hear you and everything else?
Sure. You can find me at mattwaldman.com. That's the rookie scouting portfolio. This is the 20th year of publication. It's one of the 2 most purchased draft guides by NFL people, using it as a cross-reference resource for their scouting and for their decisions in front offices. And this is according to Alex Brown, who recruits at Ole Miss and used to be the recruiting head at SMU, Rice, and Houston during the Tom Herman era. He meets with these scouts on a regular basis and see what they have. If you're a fantasy player, I also give a fantasy focused point of view with this stuff. But the RSP steeped in football. I've been delivering scouting reports and working with people like Will Hewlett, who is the quarterback coach, to Caleb Williams, to Brock Purdy, to Anthony Richardson. I've delivered reports for them to help work with those guys pre-draft and do work on that end. So you're going to get 1,253 pages this year on 165 prospects at those 4 positions. Everything's bookmarked up the wazoo. So basically, you can choose your own adventure, and it won't be as overwhelming as it looks. But you're going to get detailed reports that show you, that talk about technique and concepts, and they have an evergreen value for, I would say, or at least longer term value of 3 to 4 years. Oftentimes my fantasy guys who buy it because they want the post draft that gives you the KISS method of who to pick and all of that. They say 3 to 5 years later, I'm looking at guys who joined the team off the waiver wire, and they're starting to look like they're going to get playing time, and I want to know who they are. And I get to read, oh, well, if they wind up in this, an outside zone system, they could be good. Or they go, they play in a gap scheme, they could be strong, So that's kind of what you get with the RSP. You can follow me at Matt Waldman on X or at Matt Waldman on Blue Sky. I have a YouTube channel that has over 600 videos spanning over the past 15 years, working with guys like Jamal Williams to Will Hewlett, who I talked about, who coaches these guys, and fantasy writers and football writers like Mark Schofield, who used to write for me, or Dwayne McFarland, who used to write for me as well, over at the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. So that's my stuff.
It's great. Yeah. Hey, thank you. Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
No, we went on so long, my camera died. I love it.
Well, I enjoyed it. I appreciate you guys having me on, and I wish you guys the best of luck. The Patriots the best of luck with the draft. And
thank you.
And I hope that we can
need it.
We can have some fun discussion about wide receivers post draft.
I certainly hope so. Hope so. This was a ton of fun, a thrill for us to have you on for sure. And we'll definitely have to do it again sometime, because it was a ton of fun. So
love it.
I'd love to all the people in the chat, saying, we got to come back to this. Maybe we should revisit this and see not just where they were drafted, but how they perform next year, and see, and really it's not even next year, in 3 years from now, how they performed.
I'll bring my snorkel in case I get dunked a few times. It's all good. It'll be fine. And if I don't, then I'll run some victory laps on you guys.
See, there you go.
Or you guys can owe me a beer or two when I finally make it up to my birth state. So
you're welcome anytime, sir.
All right.
I love it's funny. It's always important to remember with this too, that we're trying to predict the futures of 21 and 22-year-old men, which is
good luck with that.
Inherently one of the that's one of the hardest things to do, not taking into account how difficult the sport football is to play, and how important circumstances to your success at the next level.
100%. Yep.
That's how it goes, and it's a fun thing, and we're all having fun with it as it goes.
Exactly. So, exactly. So, all right, anyways, thank you so much, Matt. We really appreciate it. Thanks to the chat as always, and be good to each other, and go Pats.